So this is June 6, 2009, and this is a Pathwork teleconference on the spiritual meaning of relationship. And as I was chatting before we started, it is useful sometimes before such a lecture is presented to have some level of background of the Pathwork lectures. Because if you simply presented a lecture on relationship, people would bring their social understanding and their personal understandings of relationship to the discussion. But I emphasize the title of this lecture as the spiritual significance of relationship, because the Pathwork materials look at relationship differently than we may look at it in our daily lives. So I'm going to digress for a moment and go into that and kind of expand that a little bit. One very wonderful lecture, among many, is Pathwork Lecture 233, which is the power of the word. And when you read and understand that lecture, what it says is that words carry energy. They're not simply words. They represent something. And words also evolve in society. So a word that meant one thing 50, 100 years ago can shift until it means something almost completely opposite 50 or 100 years later. When we emotionally load a word, we basically distort it a bit so that it starts meaning something differently than it originally meant. So I have developed a slight practice of an online dictionary, and when I'm not quite sure that we're on track when I work with people or when I'm discussing something, I go to this dictionary and look it up, and sometimes I am quite surprised to find out that how we are addressing the word right now is not the dictionary definition. Now you can say, but that's only the dictionary, but dictionaries are updated over time. So when a word becomes heavily loaded on a social level, so that even a modern dictionary, one published 5 years ago, does not reflect this emotional load, what that tells me is that it's like there's a pressure on the fabric of society to indicate that something has a different meaning than it used to have. And where that is useful is when we are in distortion about meanings. So here's my point. I looked up relationship, and there were 4 definitions. The first was the condition or fact of being related. Connection or association. A simple reality, a simple fact. Definition number 4 was a romantic or sexual involvement. Yet the reality today is that when we speak of relationship, we are speaking of the 4th definition rather than the 1st. And so what I like to do is differentiate the word. I accept the emotional loading that we have on a need for intimate relationship, but I want to differentiate it so that we can talk about relationship on many levels. And in a joke sense, what I do is I call the romantic or sexual involvement relationship the big R, and the simple condition or fact of being related, connected, or associated, little r. That is not to diminish either one, but simply to differentiate that relationship happens every day, every hour, every minute. You cannot avoid relationship. And in the lecture, the guide talks about intimate relationship, meaning romantic or sexual involvement, as the greatest growth opportunity we have. And the guide talks about periods of solitude or loneliness as being important places to integrate and to go to as a counterbalance. In other words, there's nothing wrong with not being in relationship, because you are still in relationship only in a different way. So being out of relationship means you're out of the big R and you're still in the little r. And in the little r, you relieve the pressure a little bit. It's not so intense. It gives you an opportunity. It's like stepping back a little bit or taking a pause from the hard work of personal growth. You do not escape it, but there is a genuine need for reflection sometimes. So I differentiate that because when we say one word but we mean a different word, we can become confused. So when we say, I want to be in relationship, I like to emphasize we are all in relationship. And emphasize that what we may be asking for is a deeper, more intense opportunity for self-growth. Even if we don't use those words, that's what happens in relationship. So I wanted to differentiate that because relationship as a fact means that you will never be out of relationship. And the guide starts off this lecture by saying, relationship represents the greatest challenge for the individual. And from the spiritual point of view, it is about individual growth and unification. So in terms of unification, my point in expanding this understanding of the word relationship is that we remember the unitive state. We know that we are all one. But on the human plane, individually, in our own skin, we don't always feel this sense of oneness. In an intimate relationship, in a paradoxical way, we can most intensely feel connected to everything. And we can also have that experience in relationship with others.